Welcome to Reform Thinking.
It's good to be here.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into some foundational thinking from C.S. Lewis. We're not even getting into the big theological questions yet.
No, not at all. This is about the bedrock, the logical starting point he establishes before anything else.
That's right. We've been going through his notes and some early writings on, well, on morality and human behavior.
Specifically, his whole argument for a universal sort of built-in standard of conduct, the thing he calls the law of human nature.
And our mission for this discussion is pretty clear. We want to really unpack his argument, which he says rests on two observable facts about all of us.
Right. And it leads to this central paradox that we want you, the listener, to really grapple with.
Which is, if we all instinctively know the difference between right and wrong, if this law is universal,
Then why do we break it all the time? And maybe even more curiously, why do we immediately, almost automatically, come up with excuses when we do?
yeah, that excuse-making is a huge part of it. So Lewis basically says these two facts. One, that the moral law exists, and two, that we all fail to keep it, are the absolute starting point for any clear thinking about ourselves.
You can't skip them.
Right.
So we'll spend a good bit of time just establishing the evidence for the law's existence.
And then we'll get into the, let's say, the more personally challenging part, analyzing what it means that we all fail to live up to it.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, so let's start with the basics, just with the words themselves. Because when Lewis says law of nature, he's not using that phrase the way a modern scientist would.
No. And that's a critical point to get straight from the outset. It causes a ton of confusion. The meaning has completely shifted over the centuries.
So it's a mistake to hear that phrase and think he's talking about, I don't know, physics.
Exactly. We hear law of nature and we immediately think of gravity or heredity or the laws of chemistry, things you'd study in a lab.
Things that describe how the physical world has to work.
Precisely. But for older thinkers, when they used that exact same phrase, they meant something very specific.
They were talking about the law of right and wrong.
Yes, a moral law that they believed applied only to human beings. That's why they sometimes called it the law of human nature, just to be extra clear.
So you have two completely different ideas using the same label. The modern one is about what things do.
Right. Lewis is very clear on this. When a scientist studies a stone or a star, they're just describing its behavior. The law of gravitation is simply a summary of what a stone does.
It doesn't choose to obey gravity.
Of course not. It can't choose to disobey it either. The law is just a description of its necessary actions.
And this is where the human situation becomes so strange and unique.
Right.
Because Lewis says we're living under multiple sets of laws at the same time.
He lays it out really clearly. First, just think of yourself as a physical object, a body.
Okay, so in that sense, I'm no different from a stone or a planet.
Not at all. As a physical body, you are completely subject to physical laws. You get dropped, you fall. End of story.
I can't just decide to opt out of gravity for a minute.
You must obey it. It's a necessity. It just defines how the physical world works.
Okay, so that's layer one, physical law.
Then there's layer two. Think of yourself as a biological organism.
Like an animal or a plant.
Exactly. This puts you under all the biological laws, things like growth, aging, metabolism, the need for oxygen.
And again, I don't have a choice in those matters. I can't just decide not to age or to stop needing food.
You can't. You're not free to disregard those biological rules. You are bound by them, just like a tree is.
But then Lewis says there's this third law, a law that doesn't apply to stones or trees or animals, only to us.
The moral law, the law of human nature. And this one is fundamentally different from the other two.
Because
Because this third law doesn't describe how we do behave. It describes how we ought to behave.
it's prescriptive, not descriptive.
That's the perfect way to put it. And because of that, it's the one law in the entire universe that a human being is free to either obey or disobey.
And that single difference, the ought versus the must, has massive implications.
It's everything. Think about it. If the moral law was just a description of what humans do, then whatever we did would, by definition, be good.
There'd be no such thing as a moral failure.
None at all. The whole idea of a moral law only makes sense if it's possible to break it. Its very existence presupposes the freedom to fail.
Which is so unlike the laws of physics. If physics were about what ought to happen, the universe would be in a constant state of chaos, with things choosing not to obey.
Right. But rocks don't have a choice. The sun rises because it must. But a man is supposed to act with justice because he ought.
But the pressure we feel from it is different. It's not a physical force pushing us, it's something else.
It's an obligation, a command that we can feel, we can recognize, but we are absolutely free to ignore.
Which creates this tension inside us, doesn't it? We are these composite creatures. Our bodies are just machines that have to follow the rules of physics.
Totally mechanical in that sense?
But our moral self,
Mhm.
our conscience, whatever you want to call it, that part has the freedom to choose, to break a promise, to lie, to be selfish.
And that failure isn't just a bug in the system. It's the exercise of a unique capacity that only we seem to have.
So to sum up this first point, Lewis is setting a baseline. The moral law isn't just an observation of how people behave. It's a standard that exists apart from our behavior, a standard that actually judges it.
And if you can grasp that difference, the laws we can't break versus the one moral law we break all the time, then you've got the first piece of his argument locked in.
Okay, so if this law of human nature is real, how do we prove it? I mean, how do we know it's not just something our parents taught us?
Well, this is where Lewis's argument gets so practical and honestly so compelling. He doesn't start with some abstract philosophy.
No, he starts with something incredibly common.
The most common thing in the world. People quarreling, arguing.
He's such a keen observer of of people. He asks us to just stop and think about what's actually happening when two humans argue.
Because it's completely different from when two animals fight.
Right. Animals fight over food or territory or dominance. It's about instinct.
It's a clash of wills or strength. The stronger one wins, and that's the end of it. The squirrel doesn't try to convince the other squirrel that it had a moral right to the acorn.
But that's exactly what we do. When you and I quarrel, we aren't just saying, I don't like what you did.
No, that's not it at all. We are trying to show the other person that they are objectively in the wrong.
And that, for Lewis, is the absolute giveaway.
It's the smoking gun. The very second you try to argue that someone is wrong, you are appealing to a standard that you assume you both share.
Without that shared rulebook, you could fight, but you couldn't really quarrel. Not in the human sense. There'd be no point in trying to prove you're right.
It's like arguing about a foul in a game of soccer. The argument only makes sense if everybody on the field agrees on the rules of soccer to begin with.
If the rules were just whatever you felt like they were, arguing about fairness would be absurd.
And yet we argue about fairness constantly, every single day.
Lewis then points to all the little phrases we use in these arguments, phrases that just assume the other person knows the rules.
They're so common we don't even notice them. Think about how often you hear someone say, "How would you like it if anyone did that to you?"
It's an appeal to reciprocity, the golden rule.
And it's not just a complaint, it's an appeal to a principle. You expect the other person to immediately get why that's unfair. You don't have to explain the underlying logic.
Or what about, hey, that's my seat, I was here first.
Right. That's an appeal to a basic rule of fair play and precedence. It assumes there's a standard beyond just might makes right.
I see it with kids all the time. Give me a bit of your orange, I give you a bit of mine.
That's a tiny, perfect example of a social contract, an understanding of debt and exchange. It's incredibly sophisticated when you think about it.
And maybe the biggest one is the appeal to a promise.
Oh, absolutely. Come on, you promised.
That appeal doesn't rest on anything physical. It's not a legal document. It rests entirely on the shared moral understanding that a promise creates an obligation.
And you expect that obligation to bind the other person, even if it's not convenient for them anymore.
Okay, so that's the accuser side. But then Lewis takes it a step further, and this is the really clever part. He looks at the person being accused.
Yes. How does that person respond when you say, "You broke your promise"?
What's the one thing they almost never say?
They never, ever say, "To hell with your standard," or "What is this promise you speak of? It has no meaning to me."
If they really believed morality was just a personal preference like your taste in music, that would be the only logical response. I don't share your preference for promise keeping.
But that's not what happens. Instead, they immediately start playing the game. They engage with the law.
They start making excuses.
Exactly. They try to argue that what they did wasn't really a violation of the standard, or they'll say there was some special reason, some extenuating circumstance.
So they'll say, I know I promised, but something came up that I couldn't have predicted.
Or, yes, I know I gave you a bit of my orange yesterday, but that was different because then you had plenty of your own food.
They're trying to find a loophole in the rule book.
And that very attempt to find a loophole is the most powerful proof that they believe the rule book is real.
You wouldn't bother trying to find a loophole in a rule you didn't believe existed in the first place.
Why would you work so hard to prove your indecent behavior wasn't really indecent if you didn't deep down believe in the standard of decent behavior?
It's a tacit admission.
Completely. The act of making an excuse shows that both people in the quarrel are operating inside the same moral framework. The law is so real that even the person breaking it feels compelled to pay respect to it by explaining why this one time shouldn't count.
That need to seem like you're not in the wrong. It just reveals how deeply this standard is embedded in us. It's not just learned. It feels like it's part of our source code.
That's a good way to put it. It presses on us from the inside.
Okay, but this is where the big objection always comes in. People say, sure, maybe people in my neighborhood agree on the rules, but what about other cultures? What about other times in history?
The relativism argument, the idea that morality is just a local custom, like how you dress or what side of the road you drive on.
And critics will say different civilizations have had completely different moralities, so there's no such thing as a universal law.
And Lewis meets this objection head on. He fully concedes that customs and the way rules are applied can look wildly different.
Of course they would. Different circumstances are going to lead to different specific rules.
But he insists that if you look past the surface level differences, the underlying moral structure is incredibly consistent, shockingly so.
The key is not to confuse a difference in application with a difference in the actual core principle.
Exactly. He says if you actually go and read the moral teachings from ancient Egypt or Babylon or the Hindus or the Chinese or the Greeks,
What you find isn't some bizarre alien morality.
no. What stands out, what's truly striking, are the similarities to our own, the echoes of the same fundamental law.
We tend to fixate on the weird stuff, the specific rituals or marriage customs that seem strange to us.
And we miss the forest for the trees. We miss the fact that no society in human history has ever held up treachery as a noble virtue. No culture has ever said that cowardice in the face of danger is the highest good.
It's just unthinkable.
And Lewis pushes this with a really powerful thought experiment. He says, okay, try. Try to genuinely imagine a country that has a truly opposite morality.
Not just slightly different, but the complete reverse.
Right. Try to picture a place where a soldier is admired for running away in battle, or where a man is praised and honored for betraying the people who have been kindest to him.
It's impossible. You can't actually make it work in your head.
Lewis says it's as impossible as trying to imagine a country where 2 plus 2 makes 5. It breaks the basic logic of reality.
And why is it impossible? Is it just a failure of our imagination?
No, it's because those core principles, things like fairness, loyalty, courage, basic self-sacrifice, they aren't just nice ideas. They're the absolute minimum requirements for any society to even exist.
It's the operating system for human life.
A community that was built on a foundation of everyone betraying everyone else would just dissolve. It would collapse in on itself in 5 minutes.
So the moral law isn't arbitrary. It's necessary.
Let's just dig into a couple of specific examples he uses. Take selfishness.
Okay,
Now, have people differed on who you should be unselfish to? Absolutely.
sure. Some cultures might say your duty is only to your immediate family. Others might say it's to your whole tribe or your nation.
And ideally today, we'd say it should extend to all of humanity. So the scope, the circle of obligation, that has definitely varied. But the core principle has been absolute. Every culture has agreed that you ought not to put yourself first. Selfishness, pure and simple, has never been an admired trait.
Nobody builds a statue to the man who hoarded all the food while his neighbors starved.
Never. The principle that self-interest has to be checked by duty to others. That's ironclad. It's universal.
And he says the same pattern holds for something like sexual morality.
Right. Marriage customs have been all over the map. 1 wife, 4 wives, all sorts of different arrangements throughout history. The specific rules change.
But the underlying idea is always there.
The idea that your impulses have to be constrained by some kind of rule or contract. No society has ever existed where the rule was just have any person you want, anytime you want. There's always been a sense that restraint is a necessary part of a functioning society.
So if morality were really just a matter of taste, like your favorite food, you expect to find some cultures that, I don't know, celebrated random cruelty.
You would, but we don't. And the fact that we can't even coherently imagine a successful society built on those principles tells you that this law is objective. It's real.
It's not a preference. It's a feature of our nature. The differences are more like dialects of the same language.
That's a great analogy. The accents change, but the grammar, the deep structure of fairness and justice, is spoken everywhere.
Okay, so even with all that evidence, the quarreling, the universality, you still have people who will say, nope, it's all an illusion, right and wrong are just fictions we made up, the moral skeptic.
Right. The person who, intellectually at least, denies the whole thing.
And Lewis has this brilliant psychological insight into that position.
He says that people can actually live that way. They can hold it as a theory in their heads, but they contradict it with their own behavior the moment they feel they've been treated unjustly.
It's a predictable pattern. You find someone who says there's no real moral law, and all you have to do is wait.
Just wait for someone to cut them in line or steal their parking spot or break a promise to them.
And their whole intellectual theory just evaporates.
Instantly. Think about the person who tells you, promises are just words, morality is a social construct. Fine. But then later, you break a promise you made to him.
What's his first reaction?
It's outrage. Hey, that's not fair. You said you would do that for me.
He's appealing to the very standard of fairness that he just claimed doesn't exist.
He's just confessed the whole thing. The gut-level feeling of being wronged completely overrides the sophisticated theory he was holding a minute ago.
And that reaction is almost like a reflex. It's not a calculated argument. It's the law bubbling up from underneath all the intellectual layers.
You can't argue away the feeling of injustice. It's too real.
And Lewis points out this isn't just about individuals. You see the same contradiction happen with nations.
Oh, all the time. A powerful nation might act as if international treaties are meaningless. You know, we only follow them when it's in our self-interest.
Morality's for the weak, that kind of argument.
But then, as Lewis puts it, they always spoil their case. When they go to break a treaty, they'll start making moral arguments.
They'll say the treaty was unfair to begin with, or that the other side was acting unjustly so we don't have to follow it anymore.
And the moment they use a word like unfair, they've given the game away.
Because if morality is meaningless, and it's all just about power, then the concept of a fair treaty makes no sense. It's a meaningless category. Why would you appeal to it?
It's what Lewis calls letting the cat out of the bag.
I love that phrase.
It shows that no matter what we profess, no matter what our official philosophy is, deep down we know the law of nature is real. We know it just like everyone else.
The sting of being wrong is the proof.
It is, and that leads Lewis to his final conclusion on this point. Right and wrong are not just matters of opinion or taste.
They're objective.
They are real. He compares them to the multiplication table. People can get their sums wrong, sure. We can misapply the rule. But the rule itself exists independently of our opinions about it.
So this law isn't something humanity invented. It's something we discovered, or maybe something that was revealed to us.
And it's something we consistently fail to live up to.
Which is the perfect pivot to the second half of his argument.
So, just to recap, we've spent all this time building the case for what Lewis calls his first foundational fact.
Fact 1. All human beings, everywhere, have this idea that they ought to behave in a certain way. This law is pressing on us and we can't get rid of it.
The evidence from our own arguments and from history is just overwhelming.
But now we have to turn to the second fact, and this is the hard one. This is where it shifts from being an observation about society to a really personal self-assessment.
Fact 2 is very simple and very blunt, Lewis says. They do not, in fact, behave in that way. They know the law of nature. They break it.
And he's so careful to say this isn't him lecturing from on high. He's not trying to moralize. He's just stating what he sees as a universal, observable fact about the human condition.
A shared failure. He puts himself right in the middle of it. He says, none of us are really keeping the law of nature.
Just think how strange that is. If we were talking about any other law, like a physical law, this would be total nonsense.
It would be. If stones only obeyed gravity sometimes, or if water decided to flow uphill on Tuesdays, the entire universe would be incoherent.
But with the moral law, this one special law for humans, consistent failure is not the exception, it's the rule.
Every single one of us has failed, probably in the last 24 hours, to live up to the standard of behavior we expect from other people.
We know what it means to be perfectly patient, but we get annoyed in traffic. We know what perfect honesty is, but we tell a little white lie to avoid an awkward conversation.
And Lewis says the reason we have trouble seeing this clearly in ourselves is because our conscience is a funny thing. It remembers the wrongs done to us with crystal clarity.
Oh yeah, for years.
But our own failures, our own moments of selfishness or impatience, they get fuzzy. We forget them almost immediately.
So he drags it out of the abstract. He uses these very Small, very mundane, very relatable examples. This isn't about grand cinematic acts of evil. It's about the little stuff.
Right. Think about being unfair to your kids or your spouse or someone who works for you. You know you are sharp, you know you are impatient, but what's the first thought that pops into your head?
It's not, I am a bad person who failed morally.
No, it's, well, I was very tired. The excuse is immediate. The tiredness, an external physical state, becomes the reason, not my own lack of virtue.
Or his example of the slightly shady business about the money.
I love that phrase. It's so perfectly British and understated.
It's the little corner you cut on your taxes, or the expense you fudge on a report. And we tell ourselves we only did it because we were very hard up at that moment.
Again, the external circumstance, the financial pressure, gets the blame. It wasn't a failure of my character. It was a necessity forced on me by my situation.
And breaking a promise. We all do it. We agree to help a friend move or volunteer for something at church, and then we don't.
Why? Because we got frightfully busy, and we convince ourselves that if we'd known how busy we were going to be, we never would have made the promise in the first place.
He also talks about how we behave with our own families. We excuse our bad moods by saying how irritating they were being.
We shift the blame directly onto the person we wronged. Their behavior caused my bad reaction, so it's not really my fault.
When you put it all together like that, it paints a pretty stark picture of the human predicament.
It does. We have this internal compass that points towards goodness, towards honesty, fairness, selflessness. We know which way north is.
And yet we are fundamentally, consistently unable to walk in that direction for very long.
And that gap, that constant universal gap between the law we know and the life we live, that is Lewis's second inescapable fact.
So if you accept his premises, and they are pretty hard to argue with based on our own experience, it leaves us all in a state of moral debt. We're creatures who live by a rule book that we both affirm and violate every single day.
Which leads to the next logical question.
Right, so we've established that we know the law, and we break the law. So
Right.
why the excuses? Why are we so compelled to justify ourselves?
If the law was just an optional guideline, you could just shrug and say, yeah, I broke it. So what? I did what I wanted to do. But we don't do that.
No, we feel this immediate need to rationalize.
And Lewis says that need for an excuse comes directly from the pressure of the law itself. He says the law is pressing on us so strongly that we cannot bear to face the fact that we are breaking it.
Our conscience is like this internal prosecutor. And the moment it brings a charge against us, our mind scrambles to mount a defense.
The excuse is the defense. Its whole job is to perform a kind of psychological damage control.
To shift the responsibility away from me, the person who made a choice.
Exactly. When you say you were tired or worried or hungry, you're trying to turn a moral failure, which is a failure of will, into a mechanical failure, a failure of the body.
If I snap at you because I chose to be unkind, I'm guilty. But if I snap at you because my blood sugar was low and I was physically tired.
And the blame shifts. I wasn't being bad. I was just a malfunctioning organism. It was involuntary.
It's a kind of self-deception, really.
Yeah.
And we are very, very good at it.
We're much better at accepting our own excuses than we are at accepting them from other people.
Oh, for sure. When my coworker breaks a promise because he was too busy, I think that's a pretty lame excuse. But when I do it, my busyness feels like a completely valid reason.
And this brings us back to the great paradox that Lewis points out. The very act of making an excuse is one more proof of how deeply we believe in the law of nature.
It's so ironic.
It is. If you were a true nihilist, if you really believed decent behavior was just an arbitrary rule, you would feel zero need to explain away your indecent behavior.
You just own it. Because in a universe with no moral law, there's no such thing as indecent behavior. There's just behavior.
The moment you start trying to explain why that lie wasn't really a lie or why that selfish act was actually unavoidable because of stress.
You're confessing. You're admitting that you believe in the rule and you know you're accountable to it.
Yeah.
The first impulse we have is to deny that accountability.
And Lewis has one final brilliant observation about this. It's about how we assign credit versus how we assign blame.
The selective accounting we do.
That's a good way to put it. We only ever look for these external excuses and mitigating circumstances for our bad behavior.
It's only my bad temper that I blame on being tired or hungry.
Right. But what about your good behavior?
We never explain that away with external factors.
Never. You don't wake up and say, wow, I was really kind to my neighbor this morning. It must have been because I got a solid 8 hours of sleep and the traffic was light.
No, absolutely not. We take full credit for that. Our patience, our kindness, our honesty That was us. That came from our good character.
We credit ourselves for obeying the law, but we blame the circumstances for breaking it.
And that double standard just confirms everything Lewis has been saying.
It forces you to admit both facts. The standard is real because we feel the need to justify ourselves when we violate it. And our failure is universal because we are constantly needing to come up with those justifications.
The law is real, we know it's real, and it's always there, pressing on our conscience.
And our endless automatic effort to dodge responsibility for breaking it proves both its existence and our complete inability to keep it.
So we've walked through Lewis's entire foundational argument. He's laid out what he considers to be two self-evident observations about reality. It makes sense to just restate them clearly as we wrap up.
Okay, fact one. All human beings have this innate, inescapable idea of how they ought to behave. The law of human nature. And we see the proof in our quarrels, in the universal themes of morality across cultures, and in the way even moral skeptics can't live out their skepticism.
Fact two, we don't do it. Despite knowing this law, we all consistently and universally fail to live that way. We know the standard and we break it, which is why we spend so much of our mental energy making excuses.
And Lewis is adamant that these two facts are the necessary starting point for all clear thinking about ourselves and the universe we live in. You can't just skip ahead.
If you try to build any kind of worldview without first acknowledging these two realities, you're building on wishful thinking, not on solid ground.
Right. And for you, the listener, the point of this whole analysis isn't to heap on guilt. Lewis's goal is to foster a clear-eyed self-assessment.
We have to correctly diagnose the problem before we can even begin to talk about a solution. And the problem, the basic definition of the human condition, is this conflict between the law we know and the life we live.
It is. And if Lewis's argument holds up, that this moral law isn't just a description of behavior, but a real command we feel we ought to follow,
And if we all fail to follow it.
then the source of that command must be something really, really unique.
So we'll leave you with this to think about. This moral law is the only law in the universe we are free to disobey. Yet it holds us accountable. It gives us commands. What does that suggest about where it comes from?
Does it make sense for a law like that to come from inside the physical universe, where all the other laws are just descriptions that can't be broken?
Or must its source be something beyond the physical universe? A conscious source, a will, something capable of giving commands to creatures who have a will of their own.
That tension right there between the universal command and the universal disobedience, that's the doorway Lewis opens to everything that comes next.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the law of human nature. We look forward to exploring the implications with you next time.